Hey, everybody. So we're going to continue this little timeout. I want this bigger. Hey, everybody. So we're going to continue these little series for release automation. Now, the next thing I'm going to look at, I've kind of talked about it, but they're very important, is your process design. So let's start with an application model. If you notice that, so there is an architect, and I'll probably get into that later. But the architect, so for an example, you have an application server, you have a backend server. Maybe I have something called the middle tier, right? Because that's what we're missing here. So let's just call that. Now this isn't mine again, so I'll probably delete some of this, but then it wants to know which servers it's going to kick off on. So you can label these if you want to. Again, I don't want this to be about this because we're going to get to the designer, and I might do a video possibly tomorrow on how to set it up from scratch, but I did do the walkthrough on my YouTube channel. Even though it's fairly old, a lot of it hasn't changed because then you have to assign your agents and yada, yada, yada. So let's just not worry about that right now. Let's just go over here to the process design. And then the process design is pretty straightforward. You have flows and you have actions. So what I like to do is start with the idea of my action. So we'll say add an action. And let's see, what do we have? Deny, run command. I don't know. I really don't want to waste too much time because like I said, I did one on the other one. Let's just check the OS. And we'll say, what is my OS? Now here, let's just save and close, even though this is expecting a value. This gets really deeper because you can set up parameters, and that's very important, okay? So when you come in here, you can set up things like your application, your agent, and this is going to know, and apologize, I'm kind of moving around the mic, so it's not good. But when you look at these actions, you can pass these around, and this is going to be where the agent is ran. So it wouldn't tell me my PC. It's going to tell me whatever agent I pick to publish, okay? So that's kind of how that works. There's some external settings that you can pick if you wanted to. Like I can force it to say OS type, right? Well, actually, that's not what that's for, but that's okay. But the point is, once I create a couple actions, let's see, let's add another action. That one's kind of complicated. I probably shouldn't have picked that one, even though it seemed like it would be easy. What about we do something like a database? And what if we execute just a SQL Server command? Notice it has a lot more parameters that I could pick. And you could hard code these, right? So I can just click on this and type in the value, blah. But that's not really the best practice. The best practice is to use variables because then you make it dynamic versus non-dynamic, right? Maybe I want to send an email, right? So to from, and I realize I'm saying right too many times. Add a text file. I really don't remember what my my demo was. I think it was just simple as copying something up with IIS and unzip it. And I just said again. I apologize about that. I'll try to stop saying that. One thing you want to do though is create categories. So maybe I want file operations. Okay. And we save. Because now I can put these things in categories that makes it so much easier for me to do something with. Remember we just talked about the file folder concept. So I'm just going to add one, even though it's going to cry because I didn't fill out all the information. And let's go ahead and add a new one. The other thing too is I can copy these, which is kind of cool because I can copy and paste it into place. Copy but keep both. And then we'll do something else here just to be different. We'll add another action. You know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to say close. And I'm going to move this up here to this category. I thought it was. I'm not allowed to move. That's okay, because what you can do is you can do copy, and then we can do a paste. And then from here, some things you can move, some things you can't. And then delete that. Now, these have, in the past, I have written so many of these that were getting very complex and very long. But again, you can control it by using your categories. So the next thing you want to do is create a flow. We'll call it Tim's, if I can spell my name, sorry, Tim's flow 1. So now all I have to do is drag these over and say, okay, do this, and then do this, and I want to map these two together, right? So there's a couple ways to do that. One thing you can do is create a link, and we'll just do that. And that's probably the easiest because when you look at the link, let's get a little bit of real estate here. What if I'm doing things like, well, what if that file doesn't exist? Then go create it. Or maybe what if it's canceled? Then do that. So that's very important because a lot of times you do lookups in these flows. So if this works, like if that file already exists, then override it or ignore it or kick off another flow. The other thing you can do too, which is kind of cool, is you can create subflows. So let's create our categories. Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta save this. So let's go ahead and save. And now what I'm gonna do is create my category, and we'll call this QA. Save. And I can't copy and paste. I mean, I can't drag and drop, but I can always copy and paste. So we'll go in here and we'll just say paste. And then what I'm gonna do is add a new flow and say flow 2. Okay. Now those can be subflows to a parent flow. So parent flow, save. And from here, I can actually say I want to execute Tim. And then from Tim, I want to execute, which one do you bring over? I'm sorry. Oops, I did it twice. You got to be careful you clicks, but you can easily delete. And then from here, we can do subflow 2. So now I can link those together. Oops. Okay. Did I not put any actions in flow 2? Let's just save this. We'll come back. Nope. Let's put at least one action, right? So we'll say add action. And now if you noticed, I can pick one that already exists, or we can go down here and just create a new one. So over here, I'm just going to do a JSON file. Next. And we'll say add and close. So now I've got a JSON file there. So let's go ahead and close. Now, if I go back to my parent flow, now it looks better because notice it's there. And that's very important to understand. If I change this flow, it's going to affect the other flows. If I change this action, it's going to cascade through the other actions. That is something that's very important to pay attention to. So let's go ahead and create a link. Why aren't you creating a link? To here. There we go. Okay. So that's very important to kind of notice because we have a flow calling a subflow, calling a subflow. Now, let me check one thing. Okay, it won't let me. I was going to see if I could just, no, we're going to test it over here, but I was going to see if I could do a dummy test. But let's go ahead and test it. Yes. And it's not going to do anything, right? Because there's nothing there. Action conflicts. Notice we have a lot of errors. That's just because we didn't put in the parameters. So I could put in the parameters and it will go through. One of the best practice is though, is don't do it here because sometimes the save doesn't always come into place. So you got to be careful with that. But notice these little reds. Those reds means errors, right? And it's just because I don't have parameters. But you've got to be careful. So if you're going to make a change, possibly make a change in an action, because then it will cascade all the way through the rest of it. Now that gets a little bit hard to manage. So a lot of times what I would do is do it at a flow and then test just that flow, even if I hard code the values, and then I'll move it over to my actual parent flow. Now, once those are built and you're happy, you're going to assume you're going to have a lot of them, right? Not just one simple one. Now what we can do is create a process, and we'll call this publish to QA. Okay. And now what we'll do is we'll go in here, and from in here we can say add a new process, and we'll say QA. Okay. And of course you have server types. Remember, we kind of talked about that. Maybe I'll do another video on that, but that has to do with your architecture and how you set this up. So let's go ahead and hit save, and I'm going to hit action. We're going to add a flow, and now it sees my flows. Now I have this QA flow, and I have the parent flow, and I'm going to add it right there, and there we go. Now, a lot of times I see customers come in here and make changes. Again, I don't recommend that because then it gets a maintenance nightmare. I recommend going to the lowest level of the entity and make the change. Now, that doesn't mean that, if I remember correctly, I'm sorry, it's been like 6 years since I've done this. I'd have to run it. But I can have one action and change its values on each flow, I think. Because normally when I change the values, I change it in the flow area. But again, it's better to have those as parameters, not just as hard-coded actions, because then you can move those around. I can have one for QA, I can have one for production, right? So that kind of stuff. And you can make your own. These are very easy to make. Just click, say new, and what we're going to do is create a new folder. We'll call it Tim's params. And then in here, I'll just say add new. And now this is kind of cool because what data type do I want to use? I'll just keep it simple and just say string, and we'll call it Tim's string value. Now here, again, this could be another parameter, or I can just hard code this, Tim's. Now, the scope is very important. Internal, a release means it's picked up on a release. Environment means pretty much anywhere. A user input means the user has to input that value. That is very common. I do that quite often. And that way, whenever you're publishing and something's going to publish, you can have the user say, publish this application, I don't know, or in this environment, or on this server, right? And then internal means just for here, okay? So, and that's kind of how those work. Now, again, the parameters are very easy. If I wanted to use one now, I guess let me show you real quick, just because it's pretty common sense. And I go, now I can see them here, and I'll just drag this over. Yeah, there it goes. It took a few minutes to get in there. And there we go. And now if I run this, this will say Tim's, because that's what I put in there. The same with the outputs. The outputs to me are probably just as important, because since this is a JSON file, if I want to return the results into Tim's like this, then I could save this. And then on my next one, you know what? Let's just do it. So we'll say copy, and I'll put a second one in there, paste. And then in here, in my input here, we'll make the input Tim's, and we'll save it. And just to keep it from getting confusing, let me go take out the input here. Okay, and save. Now this would be some JSON value, right? So maybe something like name is Tim. That's actually invalid. Give me 1 second. Oops. Okay. And again, look at the documentation to do this, but I use this a lot, especially for APIs and things like that. And then the query is going to be name. Okay. And then that would give me whatever the value of name is. Okay, that's how that kind of works. If I remember correctly, like that's been like 6 years. But if I go down to my flows now, which one has that's the parent, flow 2. So let's get a little real estate here, because now what we want to do is add the other one, which is actions. Where's my JSON? Oh, sorry. Nope. A lot of times you can just, let's close. Oh, you know, I didn't put it in the box. That's okay. I can just bring it over, and now we can add our little line, and there we go. So that's kind of how that works. And these other icons, they just kind of clean up things. That's real cool whenever you're, like here, just, oh, not here, I'm sorry, in the parent flow. And we'll just say clean up, and there we go. It gives a little cleanup action. Now I can go back and clean up this flow because it's kind of ugly. So we'll go here, and we'll just say clean up. There we go. And if you notice, instead of hitting save every time, if you just click away, it asks you if you want to save. To me, that's a lot easier. So let's run cleanup again, and there we go. So now we got some nice cleanup here. So if we go back to our processes though and hit save, QA, we have nothing. Let's add our flows. So in here, I'm going to go to flows, and we had one called Tim, parent flow, save and close. There we go. And that's kind of it. So there's not a lot to this. At that point, what I recommend is to test it. Just click test. Now this is going to fail immediately because I have no parameters, but that will do a test. And then of course, when you publish it, you click on publish, you give it a tag, or you go by the default. The default, I think, I remember correctly, is just a GUID ID or just a number ID, or you can name the tag. A lot of times I just let it do its own stuff for the tag. But here we want to assign it to an environment, and I only have the one because again, I didn't create any in this one. And then you can click to publish and execute as soon as you publish, or I can just say publish, and it moves it over here where I can pick it up. Okay. So that's kind of it for the process designer. I just said that because of that. But to me, it's a lot easier if you come in. Shared components is pretty straightforward. these are things that I could use that are already there. Okay. But also I can mark one as shared, and I can use it later or share it with my team. Tag management allows you to see all your tags. I don't have any because I didn't do anything yet, so there's nothing there to see. Import and export, so I can export these and then I can import them, which is kind of cool because a lot of times that's how I share them with customers. Let's see what else. That's kind of it, I guess. So application model, we just talked about that. Now I didn't get details in this, but it's really not hard. I wouldn't call it server 1 and 2. A lot of times what I do is I name it for whatever the action is. So for an example, if this is my IIS server, I may call it IIS. I may call this something else. My database server. And then my architecture is going to be mapping these servers to this architect. And you saw that when we did the publish, right? So if we go back to here, and if I just dig in here, and right there, and if I say publish, and if I go assign environments, see that's the one environment. Here it's picking the default one, but that may not be the one that I want, right? So that's where you come in here, and it sees this one. And what you notice, it says server 1 and 2. So those are the types that are in there. And this may say something like a database server. Again, this may say IIS server, and then you assign agents to these, and you do all that over here. But anyway, that's another story. And again, I walk you through all that in the intro video. I just want to do a bunch of short little videos to be kind of helpful. So I hope this helped.